Welcome to VIntcars, where we uncover the stories, secrets, and machines that changed automotive history. Today, I'm going to explain the documentary, The Lever That Shouldn't Exist. Let's get started. The Barrett-Jackson auction tent in Scottsdale smelled like money and leather, and the particular cologne of men who had never changed their own oil.
Marcus Webb stood at the center of it all, 47 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Webb Motorsports International, 3 championship teams, $46 million in annual revenue, a watch on his left wrist that cost more than most people's houses. He was laughing, not the polite laugh of a man being diplomatic, the loud, genuine, slightly cruel laugh of a man who finds something genuinely deeply funny. The object of his amusement was a Dragster, a 1969 top fuel Dragster to be specific, parked in the corner of the auction tent where the fluorescent lights didn't quite reach, tagged at $500, the lowest reserve in the entire 3-day event, surrounded by million-dollar muscle cars and $250,000 resto mods. It looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a dog show. The chassis was bent, not dramatically, just slightly, in the way that things bend when they've been in an accident and the accident was survived and then forgotten about. The aluminum body panels were oxidized to a dull grey that had once been silver. The cockpit was open to the air, the original roll cage still present, but showing surface rust in the joints. The front wheels were skinny bicycle-style originals. The rear slicks were cracked and flat. Someone had placed a handwritten index card on the dash. Display only, not operational. Marcus Webb read the card, looked at the car, and laughed again. He was surrounded by his people, 3 men in matching Webb Motorsports polo shirts, a personal assistant holding an iPad, and a young woman from their PR department who laughed whenever Marcus laughed because that was part of her job description. $500, Marcus said to no one in particular. For this. He walked around the car slowly, the way a man circles something he's about to dismiss permanently. His dress shoes made clean sounds on the polished concrete floor. He bent slightly at the waist to look at the cockpit without touching anything, as though the car's poverty might be contagious. That was when Daniel Mercer appeared. He came from the direction of the service area, the part of the tent where the real work happened. He was 34 years old, though the years had arranged themselves on his face in a way that suggested more. His hands were already clean. He'd washed them 3 times with industrial soap, but the knuckles were permanently darkened in the way that happens when a man has spent 15 years doing work that stains. He wore a grey Henley shirt, jeans that had been ironed, and boots that had been polished. It was the outfit of a man who had dressed carefully for an occasion on a careful budget. Daniel Mercer was not an auction participant. He was a mechanic. He'd been hired for the week to assist with vehicle staging, positioning cars, checking fluid levels, making sure the display vehicles looked their best. $300 a day. Good money, temporary work. He had a 9-year-old daughter named Cora, who was staying with his sister this week because the school was closed for teacher training, and the after-school program didn't cover the hours he needed to work. He had a mortgage that was 2 months behind. He had a 1987 Ford pickup truck in the parking lot that he'd rebuilt himself 3 times and planned to rebuild a 4th time because he couldn't afford a replacement. He walked toward the Dragster because it was his job to check the display vehicles at the top of each hour, make sure nothing had been touched, make sure the handwritten cards were still in place. He didn't notice Marcus Webb until he was already beside the car. "There he is," Marcus said. His voice carried the effortless projection of a man who had spent 20 years speaking at industry events. "Is this yours?" Daniel looked at him. "I'm with the staging crew." "But you know about cars?" "Some. This one." Marcus gestured at the Dragster with the casual authority of a man gesturing at a piece of furniture he's about to return. "What is it worth, honestly? The card says 500. I want to know what someone who knows cars thinks." Daniel looked at the Dragster. He'd looked at it a lot this week during quiet moments when the tent wasn't busy. There was something about it that kept drawing his attention, something he couldn't quite name. "The listing price seems right," he said, carefully. "Seems right." Marcus smiled. He looked at his team. "Seems right. Because it's a wreck, yes? It's a display piece. The card says..." "I know what the card says. I want to know what you say. You're a mechanic. Look at this thing and tell me what you actually see." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked at the car the way he always looked at cars, not just at the surface, but at the structure underneath it, the bones of things. "I see a 1969 Swindahl chassis top fuel car," he said. "Bent front clip, probably from a low-speed shunt rather than a race incident. The original Hemi mounting points are still on the block rails, which means the engine was removed rather than destroyed. Someone took the time to remove it correctly. Aluminum body is oxidized but not cracked, cockpit's intact. Roll cage welds look original and sound." Marcus stared at him. "You got all that from standing next to it?" "I've been looking at it for 4 days." There was a beat of silence. Marcus Webb looked at his team again, and this time the look was different, not performing for them, but genuinely recalibrating something. "So it ran once," Marcus said. "It ran. Whether it runs now is a different question." And this was the moment that Marcus Webb, CEO, decided to make. "All right." He smiled the smile of a man who has decided to be entertained. He reached into his pocket and produced a money clip. He peeled off $500 bills with the ease of a man peeling a banana and held them out. "Buy it." Daniel looked at the money. "I'm sorry?" "Buy the car. Right now. With my money. If you can start it, if you can get this thing to actually run, I'll give you $20,000 on the spot." He glanced at his PR person. "You're filming this, yes?" She nodded, phone already raised. He looked back at Daniel. "And if you can't start it, you just bought yourself a $500 piece of scrap metal." The tent had gotten quieter. Not silent, auction tents are never silent, but the immediate area had that particular quality of held breath. Daniel looked at the money. He looked at the car. He thought about Cora at his sister's house, watching television and eating the cereal she liked and asking every few hours when he was coming home. He thought about the mortgage. He thought about the 4 days he'd spent looking at this car. The thing he couldn't name. He reached out and took the money. "I'll need 10 minutes, he said. Marcus gestured magnanimously. The PR woman kept filming. The 3 men in polo shirts exchanged looks. Daniel Mercer walked around the front of the dragster and crouched beside the driver's side. He ran his hands along the chassis rail, slowly. Not searching, confirming. He'd been thinking about this for 4 days and he was confirming what he'd already come to suspect. He stood up, walked to the rear, crouched again at the back of the cockpit, behind the cracked aluminum seat. And there it was. He almost missed it the first time he'd seen it 4 days ago. It looked like a support strut, a diagonal aluminum brace running from the seat back to the rear chassis rail, painted black, like the rest of the cockpit structure. The kind of thing you'd see on any car of this era, except it wasn't a support strut, it was a lever. A mechanical lever, positioned at exactly the angle that a driver's right hand would naturally fall when reaching backward, connected to a cable that disappeared into the chassis. A cable that was not oxidized, not degraded, a cable that someone had maintained. Recently, a lever that should not have existed on a display replica. A lever that should not have existed on a car with no engine. Daniel stood up slowly. He walked around to the front of the car and crouched by the right front wheel. He reached into the chassis with 2 fingers and found the access port he'd suspected was there, a small circular opening in the inner chassis rail, plugged with a rubber grommet. The kind of port used for fluid line access, or electrical connections. He pressed the grommet. It was soft, new. He stood up again. He looked at the car for a long moment. Then he walked to his toolbox, which was staged near the service area entrance. He came back with a flashlight and a single flathead screwdriver. Marcus Webb watched all of this without speaking. Something in his CEO's instinct, the part of him that had survived 20 years of business by reading rooms, had gone very quiet and very attentive. Daniel got into the cockpit. It was a tight fit. These cars were built for smaller men in different eras, but he settled in and reached behind the cracked aluminum seat with his right hand. His fingers found the lever. He pulled it. There was a sound. Not an engine sound, not yet. A mechanical sound. The sound of something engaging. A click, then a hiss, then a deeper mechanical thunk from somewhere beneath the car, like a system waking up. Daniel reached forward. His flashlight was in his left hand, pointed at the dash area where the original toggle switches still lived. He found the one he was looking for by process of elimination, the one that was clean where the others were dirty, the one that had been used recently. He flipped it. The fuel pump started, not a roar, a hum. Electric. Purposeful. Alive. Marcus Webb took one step forward involuntarily. Daniel flipped a second switch. The ignition system engaged. A light on the dash, a modern LED, retrofitted carefully behind, the original housing glowed green. Daniel looked up at Marcus Webb from inside the cockpit. "It doesn't have an engine, he said. "But whoever built this didn't build a display replica. They built a roller, a fully functional car with a running fuel system and ignition, waiting for an engine to be dropped in. The lever behind the seat activates the fuel delivery bypass. The access port on the right front chassis is for the external start system. This car has been maintained. Recently. By someone who knew what they were doing and intended to come back." The tent was quiet in the way that tents get quiet when something unexpected has happened. "It's not worth $500, Daniel said. "The chassis alone, in this condition, with a functioning fuel and ignition system, is worth closer to $40,000. With the right engine, it becomes a running top fuel car worth significantly more." Marcus Webb stared at him. "I can't start it," Daniel said. "There's no engine, so technically you win the bet. You can take your money back." He held out the $500. Marcus Webb didn't take it. He was looking at the car, at the lever that shouldn't have existed, at the green light glowing on the retrofitted dash. He was a man who had spent his career in motorsports, and he was recalibrating every assumption he'd walked into this tent with. "How did you know?" he asked. "I didn't know. I suspected. The chassis rails don't have the stress patterns of a car that's been in static display for decades. They have the stress patterns of a car that's been driven and maintained. The rubber on the access port was new. The lever pivot had fresh lubricant on it." Daniel paused. "And it didn't feel like a display car. Some cars feel finished. This one felt like it was waiting." Marcus Webb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Who maintains a car like this and then sells it for $500? "Somebody who needed $500, Daniel said. "Or somebody who knew that the right person would find what they left." Another silence. Marcus Webb looked at his PR person. She had lowered her phone at some point during the last several minutes and was simply watching, the way people watch things that turn out to be more important than expected. He looked at the $500 still in Daniel's hand. "Keep it," Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his business card. He set it on the dash beside the glowing green LED. "Call me Monday. I want to know where the engine is." He walked away. His team followed him. The PR woman went last, glancing back once at the dragster and the mechanic sitting in the cockpit with $500 in his hand and a green light glowing in front of him. Daniel Mercer sat in the car for a while after they left. He ran his hand along the lever again. The mechanical smoothness of it, the intentionality. Someone had built this with care and hidden it with purpose and then let it go for $500 and trusted that the world would send it to the right pair of hands. He didn't know yet about the phone call he would make Monday morning. He didn't know yet about the engine that was sitting in a storage unit in Tempe, Arizona, 37 miles away, registered to a woman named Ruth Swindahl, granddaughter of the man who built the chassis in 1969. He didn't know yet that Ruth Swindahl was 81 years old and had been trying for 11 years to find someone who would understand what her grandfather had built and give it the life it was designed to have. He didn't know yet that Marcus Webb would fund the restoration, or that the car would run for the first time in 47 years on a Tuesday morning in March, or that Cora would be there to see it standing on a step stool because she was 9 and the dragster was low and she wanted to see everything. He didn't know any of that yet. He just sat in the car with the green light glowing and the lever warm from his hand, and the knowledge that some things that look broken are actually just waiting.
Thanks for watching VIntcars. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next incredible story.